Hi everyone, welcome to Wargaming Parrot. I'm David and today's a bit of a special video and it's going to be talking about pellets and the role they play in your parrot's diet. Now pellets have been kind of a controversial topic recently and there's been lots of debate, a lot of argument and a lot of strong feelings on both sides of whether you should be feeding your parrots pellets, how much you should be giving them and if you should be giving them at all. And I want to mention in this video that there is no intention to make anyone feel bad or try to sort of force anyone into change their parrot's diet. It is for educational purposes. We want people to learn, we want people to provide the best they can for their parrots, and that is what's most important. You're not evil if you feed pellets, you're not evil if you don't feed pellets, you're just someone trying to do the best for their parrots. However, it is very important that you consider all new information and that you just learn and adapt, because having these little guys, as mentioned in the interview, is almost like a science experiment and you need to constantly learn and adapt. Originally this video was going to have a lot of me talking and presenting information. However, I did an interview with Dr Jason Crean and I got so into it and it was so informative and interesting, I thought that that interview should make the bulk of this video. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show the interview and you guys can learn everything I did about pellets and hopefully maybe learn something new and help with your parrot's welfare. Well, hi everyone, Wargaming Parrot here. You all know me, but today I am joined by Dr. Jason Crean, who I'm very happy to welcome to the channel. And today we're going to be talking about pellets. Now, there may be a bit more of the video coming as well later on, but this bit is the one you're going to be wanting to tune in for. So, you know, as I said, you know all about me, you know my background and everything. You don't know, may not know about Jason. I hope you do, but if not, Jason, please introduce yourself to everyone.
Sure. My name is Jason Crean. I'm a biologist and what I guess I'm called a science communicator, which is making sense of science so that more people can understand how it works. I'm also an aviculturist. I breed green arasaris and curl-crested arasaris, the small toucans. That's been my focus for a while. I'm also part of a breeding program with the Sierra parakeets, sometimes called Aymara parakeets from South America.
Wow.
And I have my own aviary. I have Indonesian fruit doves and things like that. I'm here in Florida, so I have the luxury of being able to keep birds outside all year, which is you know, it only took me a few decades to finally get down here to do that, but my focus has been for a long time avian nutrition, animal nutrition in general, but avian nutrition. And I am a biology professor that teaches courses in zoo biology and animal nutrition.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining me again. And yeah, it's so amazing. I'm just like stunned that you breed like little toucans, you have an aviary. It's just so cool. Sophie was telling me about it before and I was just like, so cool. It's something we would love to do one day, but the English climate isn't quite as accommodating as the Florida one.
So I've heard, yeah.
So as you guys have tuned in, you may know we're going to be talking about pellets. So I'm going to be asking Jason quite a few questions about pellets and getting an expert opinion on them, because I think it's very important to have all sorts of opinions given to people on these so you can make an informed choice on what you should be feeding your bird. So the first question I had for you, Jason, is, are pellets essential to a parrot's diet? A lot of people seem to think they are. A lot of people suggest they should be. Is that true or is that false?
So I started keeping birds when I was 12 and I'm pretty old. So that was before pellets were even a thing. And we see the same health issues that we saw then now. So I don't see pellets as being the essential, the cure-all for anything by any stretch of the imagination. I worked very closely with a friend of mine, Dr. Karen Becker. She's one of the most followed veterinarians on the planet. And we both thought pellets would solve a lot of problems. And as we moved through our experience, both from her side as an avian vet and me as a biologist / aviculturist, we didn't see what we hoped we would see. And that's 20 years of information there. So we didn't see the health, birds living longer, for example. We don't see the longevity. We don't see the overall health. We see a lot of inflammatory things. So, inflammation is a normal process in the body, right? It helps stave off disease and things like that. But when you have too much, it's a real problem and can lead to other things that are bad.
Mm.
So we get those things from heat treated foods. So I don't like pellets. Most pellets outside of like tops, which are cold pressed, are heat treated in some way. The things, the ingredients are heat processed, which causes them to chemically change into things that our bodies can't use as well as if we were eating whole food, like fruits and veg and things like that. So they're not essential. If they're being offered, it should be a small amount, and the bulk of the diet should be whole food, which has healthy nutrients that actually can help keep inflammation down.
Okay, makes sense. I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of people seem to think that pellets are essential, but by the sounds of that, you know, they really are just a very small part of the balanced diet. Really, you don't really need them at all. Which leads me on to my next question. So you sort of mentioned tops, which is something me and Sophie, as a pellet brand, me and Sophie quite like. What would you say makes a good pellet? Because we talked about a little bit about what makes a bad pellet, as in heat treated. We'll go into a little bit more about that later. But what makes a good pellet?
Yeah, there's lots. I mean, we all know scientific consensus tells us that processed foods aren't good for animals, right? We're animals. We know that they're not good for us, right? So when we're looking at heat treated foods, especially those that are high in grains, like pellets, and even meats, like for dogs and cat kibble, when those things are heated so that they have a shelf life, they can sit in a bag for months at a time on a shelf. That's when you have a lot of the chemicals change because of the heat, and then you're left with those inflammatory compounds that you don't want to eat or feed your animals. That being said, tops is cold pressed, so it's not put through heat, but it's also not making the claim that it's a complete diet, right? There is no such thing as a complete diet. I mean, every time I see that on a bag, I just go, no, especially because the majority of pellets are tested on chickens who process their food differently than parrots would, for example. So to say that anything is quote unquote complete, every veterinarian that I have interviewed has said that whether the bird's on pellets or not, they still see vitamin A deficiencies across the board in most species. And that's something that just keeps coming up in conversations I have with veterinarians. So to say that anything's complete is not true. So, you know, when you look at something that, and the reason I like Tops, and I'm not a Tops employee, so, you know, they're not paying me to say this, but to look at the ingredients in Tops, they're all whole food. So our animal digestive systems have evolved to extract the nutrients out of food. And often those foods have other compounds that help you absorb those nutrients. You don't get that when you just sprinkle like a vitamin powder, which is ultimately what's on a lot of pellets. And so you need to give the animal's body an opportunity to eat a food whole with all that nutrient in it, and then they can better absorb that food. And we call that bioavailability. That means that we can absorb the nutrients and they don't just pass through us.
It makes sense. I mean, Tops does seem to fulfill Monet's criteria, although as part of a balanced diet again. And as you said, you know, when you're heat treating something, same with human foods and kibble, you're basically trading off all that bioavailability for shelf life. You're making that trade, and it's not always the best trade to make when it comes to foods. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, it's otherwise all us humans would be eating nothing but pellets as well. We'd have little pellets with all our foods, and that'll be it, you know. But we need a balanced diet. All animals need a balanced diet of all sorts of things, you know, and it's very important to have. Now, I wanted to touch a bit more on what makes a bad pellet. Now, we've talked about heat treatment, and there's a lot of other pellets that have other things in them that aren't necessarily ideal for a parrot's diet. I'm not going to name any names because that'll probably get me in trouble, but there's some that contain lots of sugars, which aren't ideal and cause behavioural problems. There's others that have nothing but fillers, and then, as you said, the sprinkling of vitamins on top of them, which doesn't really compensate for what's not in there. And then you have tops, which is right at the top, which has the cold pressed. And I'm not a Tops employee either, by the way, which like them. It's cold pressed, and it has those whole ingredients, which makes them slightly better. So what other things make a bad pellet? We've talked about some of it, but what else would you recommend people look out for when they're shopping? If they decide they want to keep feeding pellets as a diet, what they should be looking out for as sort of red flag signs and things to avoid?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because you have a lot of controversy about some of the ingredients themselves. Like, there is a sect of people out there who think that soy is just a miracle food, when in fact I don't recommend feeding soy to anything, including people.
Oh, okay.
And the more, the research is very contentious right now when it comes to soy, about the phytoestrogens and what those can do, and things like that. So those, when you look at those, you look at, like you said, the sugars. If sugars are being added, that's the way that they're going to try to get your birds to eat it, right? That's the only reason it's put in there. It's not because it's an important nutrient, right? It's sugar, and often table sugar, like stuff that nobody should be eating. And then, it's funny, because I'll hear even professionals in the field say things like, oh, you shouldn't feed sunflower or peanuts. And yet they'll recommend a pellet that has sunflower and peanuts in it. So once again, that's another red flag. Now, I don't feed peanuts. I don't recommend feeding peanuts. I think there is plenty of other things out there to feed. I don't like peanuts' fatty acid profile. I don't like the fact that they can produce aflatoxins from molds that can be from sitting in places too long. But when it comes to sunflower is extremely nutritious. But when you're making that the base of a diet, where it's one of the first ingredients, that's problematic. Just like those sunflower seed diets of the 1970s, 60s, 70s, 80s that were so common. It's things like that are problematic. And when you have a lot of grains that are put into foods and then heated, that's where you have those chemical reactions I was talking about earlier that transform the nutrients into inflammatory compounds. And that's what we want to avoid. Okay,
well, it makes sense, really. I mean, yeah, the whole seed profile thing, like for a long while, so it swung one way. Seeds were good, feed them only, and then it swung all the way other way, where you shouldn't feed any seeds. And me and Sophie sort of sat in the middle of it a little bit. I did a video on seeds, and it's okay in moderation. I called it junk food, which I'm going to change based on what I've learned from watching you and reading, because Sophie suggested reading from you. I'm going to change it to treat food, because as part of a balanced diet, it's fine. If it's not just sunflower seed, it's okay, because as you said, there's many essential things. And pellets start to become a bit unnecessary, really, when you look at all the other alternatives that aren't that expensive and how you can provide them cheaply and easily, no matter where you are. It is, I'm going to have to say it, pellets have become the new convenience food for parrot owners. This is a contentious thing to say, but I feel it needs to be said at this point. Seed was a convenience food, and now it's pellets. And it's okay to have a little bit of that, but when it's just all you feed, it's just not the best. Which leads on to my last question before we go on to some other thoughts on the topic. This is kind of a leading question, because I want to get your thoughts on what a parrot should be eating in general and sort of things you suggest. And what would you recommend to someone who's feeding pellets and want to transition them off? And what is good in a parrot's diet? What would you feed your parrot instead of pellets if you had the choice?
So what I feed mine every day, and I can say with confidence that I have no pluckers. I never have any hormonal birds. My birds are completely healthy and never want for anything. They're very well taken care of, and that goes for my softbills as well, who are not on pelleted diets, who get a variety of fruits and vegetables and things like that. So for to generalize a parrot diet, even though we have birds from a few different continents that in our care, to generalize, one of the best things to start with is soak and sprout. So soaking and sprouting grains and certain legumes, certain, not all, certain legumes, is your best bet and your best way to transition birds to healthier diets. They often recognize those soaked or sprouted items as food. If a bird has never seen a kale leaf before, for example, like, they may be apprehensive. But whenever you're transitioning birds to healthier foods, it's more about your behavior as the bird owner and less about the bird behavior, because you have to be persistent and you have to, kind of give them some tough love. I'm not saying starve a bird, but I've never seen a bird starve. If there's food there, they will absolutely eventually eat it. And it can take months at a time.
Definitely.
But in my morning ritual is giving them soaked and sprouted foods along with, and I mix those all together with like shredded greens and some fruits, including the fruit seeds like melon seeds, papaya seeds. Those no pits, obviously, those are not recommended, but melon seeds, squash seeds, papaya seeds are awesome additions. Parrots, like, that's why they eat some of these fruits to begin with, to get to the seeds. So and soaked tree nuts, I soak out of the shell. I'll soak things like walnuts and pecans, for example, just overnight, rinse them in cool water, and that increases their digestibility. And if you know anyone who's on a pretty strict vegan diet, you will probably know that they use a lot of soaked nuts in the diet as a base for certain things. So that's we're just trying to replicate that as well for our birds. Then in the evening, my birds have access to dry seeds and tree nuts, as well as freeze-dried and dehydrated fruits and veg. The more textures and shapes and colors and tastes and smells, the better. That's why, like, we need them to forage. Birds spend most of their time foraging because they're eating a lot of nutrient-poor foods in the wild. And so they need to eat more things in the wild typically because there's not a lot of nutrient. They're eating unripe things, for example, which, the nutrients aren't readily available in those things. And I'm generalizing here, but
Yeah.
It's you can't talk about every single species separately or we'd be here for hours and hours. But when it comes to the daily, always they have soaked and sprouted items with fruit and veg in the mornings. They do not have access to dry food until I give that to them later in the day. This myth that they have to have dry food in their cage 24/7 is not. This is why we have birds with fatty liver disease. This is why we have birds that are obese. That sort of thing. So keeping those things in mind so that they can have a diverse diet. And soaking and sprouting is cheap. It's easy. Anyone can do it. And fruit and veg you can get at any grocer. All of that combined, and I have tracked my expenses for years, and it is always cheaper to do this than it is to buy expensive pellets. And so, and then you're giving your bird all of those foraging opportunities that are natural, keeping it engaged physically and mentally.
Definitely. I mean, if you just had nothing but pellets, it's kind of boring for them. They have the same thing to root through all the time. Whereas as we provide as well, Sophie is quite keen on her sprouted seeds. She's actually got a video which I'll leave a card for now on sprouting, which is very good. We're very keen on providing lots of different things. So Sophie in the morning, she tends to do the morning feed. So she'll provide chop, sprouted seeds. She started soaking the nuts since she spoke to you as well now. So that's kind of cool to see them rooting around. Olive especially loves them. She just goes crazy for them. And then I tend to end up doing the dry mixes in the evening. So I'll end up giving them their little variety of a few spices, different seeds and flowers, all sorts of different fun things to eat. And it's so, as you said, it's so important to give them that variety. And you don't have to always have those dry foods in the cage. You can normally, as Jason said, normally it's best to have your sort of like vegetables and soaked sprouts in the morning and then swap to a dry in the evening so they can sit overnight. and they can just have a nibble of it, and it's still, you know, beneficial to them. It's still healthy. And again, to reiterate, foraging, as Jay said, is so important, and you can provide this opportunity just through their food. You don't always have to just make a foraging tray, which I do recommend because it's lots of fun. But their food bowl can be a foraging tray, and it can be enriching, and it can be exciting, and it's just so cool to see. Let me think of an example. Like, for example, the boys, they'll root around and they will find their sprouted beans, the safe ones again. So you've got to be on that too. They'll find them and favour them, and they'll throw things around. That's what they should be doing. And then Olive will start squealing when she finds a little bit of soaked nut. It's rewarding to see as a bird, you know, parent. It's so fun to see them enjoy themselves and live their best life, basically.
Mm-hmm.
There was a couple of other things I wanted to touch on as well. So a lot of these are sort of arguments against normally, and the most common one I hear from people when we're talking about pellets is, but my vet said. And I thought it was important to mention this as well, because I mean, I think your opinion is going to be a lot more valid than mine here. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on, but my vet said they should have pellets.
So I chose to leave vet school for this reason mostly. And it is the poor nutrition education that veterinarians get. And I'll argue worldwide. In the States, it's pretty clear. And when I'm asked to speak at vet schools on avian nutrition specifically, it is very, very clear that there is a biased science education there when it comes to nutrition. The textbooks are purchased by the pet food companies for all the vet students here. So it is very biased. And I know because vet students come to me saying, like, I want to learn more about this, but I don't have the opportunity to do so in school. And I understand that. That's not, like, that's nobody's fault. What the problem is, you're trying to teach professionals so much. There's only so much time for everything. And especially when you're a vet and you have to learn bovine, equine, you know, how to feed horses and cows and goats and sheep and all that sort of thing, and canine, feline, birds, you know, a pretty well-known vet here in the States actually looked at me and said, we get like a day of parrot nutrition, like a day, like there's not, like, you know, so it's frustrating. Veterinarians are critical to bird health. We have to have vets on our team to make sure that our birds are engaged, you know, in the most well life that we can give them. And veterinarians are highly trained in surgery and medicine and things like that. But nutrition often, and the vets, the countless vets I've interviewed, there's a frustration with them where they say, well, I can't trust the clients to do it right, so I just have to tell them pellets, right? You're not a bad person because you're feeding pellets, right? I mean, that, like, you're doing what you think is best, but you can do better. We can all do better. I'm always doing better. Every time I see a new produce item at the store, I'm like, oh, let's try this and let's see how the birds react. Like, keeping birds is a scientific experiment that never ends. And so veterinarians are saying these things because they feel like they have to, by and large. And when I speak, like I said, when I'm invited to speak at vet schools on avian nutrition, I can see it firsthand and how frustrating it is. And I had right before the pandemic, I was speaking at a vet school here, and some of the students and I went out to lunch after my talk, and they just couldn't shut up. They were so like just like buzzing because they were all bird owners. They all wanted to learn more. They felt validated in that some of their colleagues would tell them, like, oh, well, that's all fluff, or those are fad diets, for example. And I'm like, we've been feeding soaked and sprouted seed for decades. Like that's no secret. When I started, you know, keeping cockatiels when I was 12 years old, that was a thing, you know? So I think that we have to take, much like getting nutrition advice from human doctors, we have to kind of say, okay, I appreciate that information. and then kind of weigh it and see what works best for us as owners. Knowing that you can also look at the science yourself and kind of do some additional research, because that's what vets have to do if they're going to learn more about avian nutrition as well.
I mean, completely valid point. I mean, as Jason said as well, this video I made this video not to attack anyone. As he said, no one's evil for feeding pellets. We're all trying to do the best by our birds. However, you know, it's also up to us to engage in this lovely science experiment called having a parrot, or life in general. Basically, it's all one big experiment. You know, we can enjoy it. We can learn from it. Me and Sophie constantly trying to learn more and improve our parrots' lives, and through that we improve our own lives. It sounds as corny as that is. It's fun. It's enjoyable to see them thrive. So no attacking. We're not trying to attack anyone at all, and it's just important to learn yourself. As Jason said, weigh everything up, think very carefully about what you're feeding your parrot, and make your own decisions, because neither me nor Jason can tell you what to do. You know, we can advise you, we can tell you what we think's best, what the science says is best, but it's up to you to make your decisions overall on that topic.
It's no different than human diets. I mean, if you're eating a carbohydrate heavy diet, you're going to have health problems, right? If you eat a lot of bread, for example, which is a comfort food, it's a convenient, right? Like,
I love bread.
I know, I do too. That's a problem. But when you, it's the same. Like, we can always do better with our diets, and we know that, right? We know that tomorrow we can wake up and say, you know what? I'm going to turn over a new leaf. I'm going to, like, literally, I'm going to eat greens and I'm going to eat all this healthy food, and then I'm going to see an improvement in my life, right? In my health. It is absolutely no different than any of the animals we keep. I went to raw food diets with my dogs, raw meat-based diets that are balanced. And the difference, especially for some of the dogs that were rescues that came in with lots of health issues, their health issues just kind of disappeared over the first few weeks because their body was now getting nutrition that they could access. Very, very different. And it's the same with birds. If you're feeding pellets, you can definitely reduce the inflammatory compounds that they're taking in by adding antioxidants, which are not available in a processed food, but are widely available in fruits and vegetables and soaked and sprouted items and things like that. We can always do better.
Definitely. I mean, I'm trying to eat healthier right now, and it's difficult. You know, it can be sometimes, and as you touched on right at the start of it can be difficult to convert your parrot to a healthier diet if they're used to the same old thing. If I had a choice for eating burgers and pizzas and bread all the time, that's what I'd like to eat. But I'm aware that I need to eat healthier food. So I have a salad for lunch, you know, most days of the week, you know, mix it up a little bit. Yeah, it's the same for our little guys. And they'll get used to it, and they will start, as Jason said right at the start, they will start eating it and they will start enjoying it. I mean, Sophie's got videos on specifically on cockatiel conversion. I've got videos on converting parrots to veg, and many of our clients have had success and seen noticeable health and behavioral improvement from it. Mm-hmm. So it is worth trying it. It's worth giving it a go. Even if you just give it a go, it's worth just trying to do a little bit better for it.
Yes.
Now, we talked about researching a little bit yourself, you know, balance, weighing up what you hear. Where would you recommend that people do get the information if they want to learn a little bit more? Obviously, there's YouTube, there's yourself, you've got a lovely Facebook group, which I'll hopefully leave a link for in the description as well, so people can check out themselves. And where would you recommend people go for the information?
Yeah, and it's hard because what many people tend to do is find someone who is saying what they want to hear and stick with that, right? That's hard. You know, someone who has a long history of keeping birds, in knowing and having that foundational science piece that fully understands how the science of nutrition works. Like, I know how carbohydrates and proteins and fats work for the body. Like, we need those. We need all animals need those in some way, minus carnivores when it comes to carbs for the most part. But when it comes to looking for a resource, it needs to be science-based, not emotion-based. That is a huge downfall. And anytime, and I know before we started, we brought up the word anthropomorphize. And that is doing our birds a huge disservice. And I think that's why birds end up in rescues. People have this idea that they can treat them like little people, but we need to treat them as birds. We need to respect them as birds. We can't unbird them, right? They need to be birds. And so, a lot of people will assign human emotions and behaviors to them and think it's cute, but it's actually doing them a huge disservice. And I think that's why we have a lot of hormonal birds. We're feeding them things because we just call it a treat. But
yeah,
I
like
mean,
a little
a
bit of human
smidge
food.
of something, yes, a smidge of something is that's a meal for some birds, right? That's like, I mean, that's big. So, we have to start treating them as birds and respect them for that. Birds are amazing natural creations. Like, it's amazing what birds can do. We need to respect them for that and keep that in mind and not associate everything human with birds. It puts the birds at a great disservice.
It can be very difficult for even me and Sophie find ourselves at times knowing, having worked with birds for so long, finding ourselves like, oh, it's being cute, or you see a ringneck saying I love you. It doesn't love you, it's just repeating what you've taught it.
Yes.
And yes, they will show certain signs of affection in their own way as birds, not like humans.
Right.
So a lot of hormonal behaviors get confused with signs of affection, and that's something we see an awful lot of. And it's important as a parrot owner to just just basically summarize. I don't need to repeat it. So treat them as birds, basically. So
Yes.
Jason said it perfectly. I may even cut that bit out because it doesn't make any sense me repeating it.
And no one's doing these things to be bad owners, right? They think their bird likes being inside their sweater, or or that sort of thing. That leads to bad behavior. But if you don't know that, you can consult experts. My colleague Laura Joseph, who runs the Animal Behavior Center, she runs an online membership program, the Parrot Project, and she's just amazing. And she just addresses those things hands-on because she wants people to have a positive relationship, an ongoing positive relationship with their birds or whatever animals that they may be. And knowing, she says, how does she know it? To know is to do better, or something like that. I can't remember what she normally says, but just having that in your head and going, oh, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be touching my bird on its back, or maybe I shouldn't be letting a bird crawl into things like boxes, because that could elicit undesirable breeding behavior, things like that. Once we have those open, frank discussions, it makes things easier for you and your bird and doesn't put a strain on your relationship. And like I said, we're not attacking anybody or saying anybody's bad, but it's just the more we know, the better we can do.
Yeah, it's the same with everything, really, for us humans, with all the problems we face, other animals. As Jay said, the more you know, the better you can do. And there's the really old expression, knowledge is power. It's true in this respect,
Yes.
Not that you're trying to dominate or power your bird, you're just trying to look after them and be nice to them, and it's just, couldn't agree with that more. I'm just going to look at my notes quickly. I'll probably cut this little bit out. Right, so all I had after that was just some final thoughts. So, Jason, do you have any sort of like last thoughts you'd want to sort of relay to my viewers, or any sort of thing, anything else you'd like to cover before we end the call?
So regardless of what you're feeding, the more that you can feed as whole food, the better, and less you have to feed of the processed foods. There are things in whole food you cannot get in a processed food. So the more you do, the more diversifying you do, the better. One thing that's really critical about all of this, regardless of what you're feeding, is portion control, and not giving your little cockatiel a bowl full of food all the time. With fresh food, I kind of go by the tablespoon method, where I will do a heaping tablespoon of fresh food for small birds, and then a heaping tablespoon of dry food in the evening, and then use that as a baseline. And if they eat all of that diversity that's on that spoon, that within a couple hours, I can always give them a little bit more, but it at least gives me a baseline. So I know if you give them too much, they're going to pick out what they want and leave everything else. So by giving them some portion control, you are not hurting your birds. You're not doing anything bad to your birds. I kind of see it just like human children. You're not going to feed them 18 meals a day, like, because you're worried that they might starve. Like, that's not a thing. More is not necessarily better. And so, I tend to do 1 tablespoon for small birds, 2 for medium birds, 3 for large birds, just as a baseline. And then, I move up from there based on what they're eating. And if they're eating almost all of that diversity, I can then feel good about giving them a little bit more.
Okay, awesome. I mean, yeah, portion control sounds very important. I mean, I know you touched on it with the video interview you did with Sophie, which I'll also leave a card for now. That was an awesome interview. It covers some of the same topics, but there's a lot more on general diet advice there.
Yep.
So if you are interested in learning more from Jason and Sophie, please do give that a watch. But righty, I mean, this has been enlightening for me. It's been very interesting. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, you too. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll wrap things up. Thanks very much for joining me. For all of you who are watching, thank you very much for joining me as well. There may be a little bit, start again. There may be a little bit more towards the end of the video that I may add on, but in the meantime, I hope you all have a good day. Take care and see you later from me and Jason. So guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interview and this video educational and useful. Remember, I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad. It's literally just education and trying to help everyone learn and improve their parrot's diet. In the meantime, any comments, please feel free to leave them down below, and take care and see you later.